the problem of Deep Utopia is what would we do in a solved world? For example, to know mathematics is to invest a bunch of time and effort into learning mathematics. But at technological maturity, if you could just sort of download the Algebra 2 module at the press of a button, there would be no need to exert effort to learn mathematics. You can kind of start to cross out a lot of these activities. So then you enter this more problem of Deep Utopia, which is more radical, where you have to start to rethink really questions like the purpose and meaning and ultimate value. There's a little ray of sun shining through the dark, gloomy clouds. No, I think both sides have always been there. And in fact, there have been little glimpses. I wrote something called Letter from Utopia a good many years ago, which was an attempt to poetically evoke some of the positive things that could be attained. It's just that it seemed more pressing at various points in the past to try to do some analysis and draw attention to various things that could go wrong so that we could avoid them. And then if we avoid these pitfalls, then eventually we'll have plenty of time to think about what to do with this big future that we would have secured for ourselves. There are a lot of concepts and ideas, but I guess one key concept is that of technological maturity, which I define as a condition in which all the technologies that are physically possible and for which there is some feasible pathway of development have been developed, or at least some reasonable approximation to that. I should say the book, it brackets a lot of things, and in particular, it brackets the question of how to get from here to there. So it kind of sets aside all the practical difficulties that lie ahead of us in order to sort of get to the point where you could actually ask the questions of what then? You know, whereas Superintelligence, the previous book, kind of asked what could go wrong with AI. At least 95% of the pages were on various risks. This asks kind of what if things go right? So then I think eventually we have like condition of technological maturity. So that's kind of one word that helps set some of the premises. Then there is the concept of a solved world, which you might think of as a world in which we have technological maturity, but on top of that, we have also solved all coordination problems or political problems or fairness problems. So you have a world that is in some sense, but maybe with important qualifications, maximally malleable to human wishes or values. The problem of Deep Utopia is what would we do in a solved world? If human instrumental effort becomes otiose and we don't really need to do any. The robots can, serve our food, and then like what gives meaning and purpose to human existence in such a radically transformed condition. A lot of efforts in this realm, utopian imagination, I think, have kind of stopped early in a journey that can go on for a lot longer. So, and it's very natural. I mean, so you have like the kind of the most primitive form of utopia, or there's like almost every culture had this. I mean, if you imagine you're some medieval peasant who works all day and like you eat some porridge and you're still hungry, like the kind of obvious thing you dream of is a state of abundance, just having like a lot of food and you can rest and money grows on trees, and there's maybe if there's like intense social pressure and constraint, maybe you're also imagining a kind of feast time, a party time where social mores are loosened up. And that's already enough to be like a fantastic fantasy in that condition. Then you have the class of utopias that are really more stand-ins for, like, it's kind of symbolic political struggle. So you have some utopias that warn of various tendencies in contemporary society, which, if allowed to continue, would lead to some more overtly bad condition. And so you have like 1984 or Brave New World and a whole bunch of other sort of political writings in the guise of utopias. And then more recently, you have these attempts to think through, what about automation? If like AI is doing all this stuff, what will happen to the human labor market? And the more radical forms of that think, well, you know, what if robots could do all economic human labor, or all except with a few, you know, carve-outs? Then maybe you need some universal basic income, and you could have like some discussion about that and what would happen to the education system and culture in that kind of world. But I think there's like a step further on this journey, at least one step further, which is to realize that it's not just human economic effort and labor that would become unnecessary in a solved world, but all kinds of other human effort as well. So you mentioned learning, like that's one thing that you might spend effort doing now, because the only way, for example, to know mathematics is to invest a bunch of time and effort into learning mathematics. But at technological maturity, if you could just sort of download the Algebra 2 module at the press of a button, there would be no need to exert effort to learn mathematics. Right now, you have to, like, if you want to be fit, you have to go to the gym and work out. But if you could just pop a pill and your body does the same thing. And so you can kind of go through activity by activity, the things that would currently fill the days of somebody who had achieved, I don't know, leisure, entered retirement and have a lot of money. Like, you can kind of start to cross out a lot of these activities, or at least raise a question mark above them, because maybe we would choose to do some of these things anyway, but it seems that a lot of what gives them their allure today is that there is some outcome that you secure by doing them, and that would just be a kind of sense of pointlessness if you know, you could study mathematics, but why, if you could get equally good at mathematics by, you know, downloading it? Or maybe people like to go shopping as a fun, pastime, but part of maybe what gives that activity its allure is that at the end of the day, you might end up with some item that you really like that kind of enhances your life, or, you know, it looks good on you if it's a clothing. But if you had like a kind of recommender system that could just pick out better stuff than you would pick yourself and then order it, then, you know, is it still as fun? If the upshot of that is that you actually get worse items than if you just let the AI do its thing. And so then you enter this more sort of, the problem of Deep Utopia, which is more radical, where you have to start to rethink questions like the purpose and meaning and ultimate value from the ground up. Well, first of all, it's not really so much a book of conclusions as a book of that, like, helps maybe the reader to ask questions and to think about them, to sort of bring them into conscious awareness. And second, it's an ambivalent book in many ways. I think ultimately hopeful, but it's not trying to lay out the case that the problems are not really real and that it's all hunky-dory. I think there are kind of, once you start to think through this, a lot of, disillusionment or something. Like, I think once you get through that, you can maybe construct something really good at the other side, but it will be probably in many respects quite non-human, or feel a little alien, at least until you get used to it, the kind of existences that would make sense in a post-instrumental condition. These various instrumental constraints that we currently face, all of us, even people who don't have to work for a living have to do a whole lot of other things. If they want to have a decent life, they have to brush their teeth, they have to, you know, spend time doing this, that, and the other, and put in effort. I think it forms just as insects have like a kind of an exoskeleton that holds the gooey bits in place. I think these instrumental constraints that we face in our lives kind of hold the human soul together. And if you imagine removing that, then there's the question of what we could be other than a kind of blob, like a drugged out pleasure blob or something amorphous. One can look for places where it would be instrumentally necessary for humans to put out effort. Mm-hmm. We might put out efforts for other reasons as well, just because if we think putting out effort is intrinsically valuable, we might choose to do it for that reason. But we might think that there is like some special value in putting out effort, and where there is like an instrumental reason for doing it, that something is achieved or done or accomplished that couldn't be accomplished without you actually making the effort. One might think that those kinds of setups have particular value. And there, I think a lot of the potential for those have to do with various forms of social cultural entanglements. So basically, let's suppose you have one of your value preferences is that the other person's preferences be satisfied. Now, if the other person happens to, for whatever reason, want you to do something that requires effort and wants specifically you to do it, as opposed to having the thing done by some machine, that might just be a brute fact of this other person that they happen to have that desire, then you, with your desire that their desire be satisfied, would have no other way of accomplishing that than by putting out the effort, because that's specifically what they want. So that this seems kind of a little bit hokey in that simple setup, but I think more subtle versions of that could be quite pervasive. So certainly there could be a lot of values that are unrealizable in the real world or in any future we could attain, because you could have kind of arbitrarily resource-hungry preferences. Mm-hmm. And certainly if you make more people, then eventually resources will run out per person, right? Like there is if you have a finite cosmic endowment, then for a sufficiently large population, you will have a Malthusian state. It's like a kind of a lens perspective in how one approaches these questions. Mm-hmm. That I think you get very different answers if you think what kind of future would actually want to live in versus what is the coolest kind of future to explore in a science fiction scenario. And obviously, when you present the questions like that, it's impossible to confuse them. But I think in reality, when people think about these futures, some people allow intuitions from the outside perspective to creep in to a larger extent than they should. Now, there is a general difficulty in making one's thinking amount to something more than just a kind of regurgitation of the more or less random influences one has had or the literature one has read. So there's kind of more formal work that people do in population ethics and stuff where you could do some analytic work, and it's easy to see how you could make intellectual incremental progress by kind of debating that. But when it comes to sort of the values themselves, it's very hard to have opinions about that add signal, as it were, because these are highly subjective in many ways. And if you want your thinking on these things to reflect something more than your mood or your own idiosyncratic personality or the particular cultural milieu you happened to grow up in, it is hard to do that. I think in general, the likelihood of having signal is increased if one allows, and maybe to the extent that one allows, different alternatives to play with one's soul and to kind of enter into the frame of mind of a certain value and, as it were, run with it or let it fill you up for a period of time and then maybe another one. And if you're just operating at the level of words and some bit you remember or an opinion survey or stuff like that, I think you're unlikely to kind of add more information to the extent that it is a question of information. Mm-hmm. about these ultimate value questions.